Well, our favorite spooky season is finally upon us, with only a few short weeks between now and our favorite holiday. Of course, I refer to Halloween. And so today, I'm showing you how to make this Halloween countdown clock that I just whipped up in my wood shop. I'll be showing you briefly how to do the electronic screen and referring you to somebody who's a little bit better at the electronics. And then I'm going to show you how I made this frame out of some plywood and some scrap boards. This project is divided roughly into two phases. First is the electronics, which is based on this plan or this project by John Park. And the second is the frame, which is my own design and will complete after the electronics are finished. I'm not going to go into great detail on the electronics. That's not my own area of expertise, and I'm following this pre-existing plan. I will show you how it's done, but if you wanted to follow along, you would use this plan by John Park. It's a complete walkthrough that shows you how to build the electronics as well as how to program everything and get everything running exactly how you need it so you can make your Halloween countdown clock. Okay, so let's have a look at all of the various parts that we're going to use. I have a box of screws that I'll be using toward the end of the project to mount the clock into the frame. So put those to the side for now. I also have, this is a clear acrylic panel. It's covered with paper, but once the paper's off it will be clear. This is used as a diffuser to make the screen look a little bit better. We're also going to put this to the side for now. Later on it'll be cut to the appropriate size and affixed to the face of the clock. But what we're actually interested in are the electronic components. I have some stickies that I'll be using for that acrylic diffuser later on. USB cable, power cable. This is the matrix portal. This is going to be the brain of our clock. Comes in a pouch. There's a couple screws in there I don't want to lose. So this is the actual computer that we'll be using. We'll be loading the clock program onto this, and we'll be attaching that computer to this. This is our LCD screen. We'll be plugging the computer, the matrix portal, into the back of this. We'll be connecting everything up to power, and this will be what the actual clock looks like. Alright, so those are all of our parts. I also have some screwdrivers and things here. Let's go ahead and get started. The first step is going to be loading the CircuitPython software onto this little computer. Okay, the CircuitPython software is now loaded on here. That was very easy to do. You can just follow the instructions on the John Park plan that I've linked down in the What's It. It's really just a click and drag sort of installation. But now that this is ready, we're going to connect this to this power cable. First thing we need to do is this has these little protectors. So we just need to use the tweezers to wrestle those off. There's one. And there's the other one. And now we just connect the power. The black goes to ground and the red goes to the 5-volt connector. To do that, we will use these included screws. There's the black one done and the red one also done. There we go. All connected up. Now we just connect this to the board. Now we can plug either of these 4-prong connectors to the 4-prong connector on the back of the board. That's the power connector. And it only fits one way, just like so. And that's connected. And then finally, we just plug the matrix portal into the screen on this port right here, making sure the orientation is correct. And it hangs out over the side just a little bit, giving us access to these buttons on the side. That's how we want it. And that's done. And there it is. There's our clock ready to go. The hardware's all installed. Now we just need to program it. In order to do that, I'm not going to show you the actual process. It's just on that website that I mentioned before that I'll link down in the What's It. All we really need to do is copy the code, make a couple of modifications, and get everything up and running. Alright, everything should be programmed up and ready to go. I'm going to plug it in and hopefully it works. It's going to take it a second to load up. In the meantime, I've found a clock online that says 60 days, 9 hours, and 6 minutes until Halloween. So hopefully my clock will agree. 60 days, that's correct. There's a ghost. 9 hours, also correct. Bats. 6 minutes. Perfect. So it's working properly. Now all I need to do is go into the workshop, put the diffuser screen on, and make the frame. That's probably going to be a couple days hence because this is a busy week. So by the time you see this, the 60 days will no longer be correct, but we'll get this done as soon as we can. Now that the clock is actually working, it needs a frame. In order to do that, we're going to work here in the garage workshop. The first thing I need to do is get this acrylic screen mounted onto the face of the clock. In order to do that, I have some adhesives that are going to stick it on, but the first thing we need to do is cut this down to size. So we're going to take the clock and we just need to measure. Make sure it's perfectly square, and we'll just draw a line. And there we go. Now we have a line. We can use that to cut it out on the table saw. I'm just going to use my square just to make sure that line is nice and straight. And now I'll take this over to the saw. I'm going to set my fence on the table saw so that this line lines up with the blade. Always remember that the blade has thickness, or what's called kerf. And so you need to line the line up to the outside of the blade so that the actual size of the workpiece is not some fraction of an inch smaller than it really needs to be. That looks perfect. Also, when in doubt, you're always better off cutting a little bit too big, and you can always come back and nibble some more off the edge if you need to. Better to do that than to cut too small. Also, whenever you're using power tools, make sure you're using hearing protection. And whenever you're at the table saw, don't push with your hands. Use either the push stick that comes with the saw, or in my case, a push block. There's our first cut, looks pretty good. Now just to get the second one. As a wise worker once said, measure twice and cut once. So now I know that that line for sure is going to fit this clock. And now for this cut, because we're cutting off such a small piece of the edge, cutting against the fence this way doesn't seem like the best option. Instead, I'm going to use the miter gauge for my table saw. If I were a wealthy man, I'd invest in a better miter gauge, but this one will get the job done just fine. And we'll do one last check to make sure it'll fit. And there we go, a perfect fit. So now we just need to peel off this backing and apply the screen to the front. You'll have to forgive the sound of my neighbors mowing the lawn while I'm working, but we carry on. I did a quick test on my chosen adhesive method. This is what the acrylic looks like without the backing. And I've applied one of the adhesive squares to that, and we can see that once that's on the screen itself, that's essentially invisible, so that'll work well. Alright, I've peeled the backing off. I'm going to apply these squares in the appropriate placements.
Certainly want one per corner, and probably a couple more. Alright, that should do. Now we'll just peel all of these off, and then we'll just carefully apply this to the clock. Very loosely until I know that it's all square. It looks good. And then I'll just apply some pressure to it. Make sure it gets nice and well stuck. And then I'll take the front side off as well. And there we go. Let's plug this in and make sure that it still works properly. Alright, I've gone and grabbed myself a USB adapter for my extension cord, so now is the moment of truth. Looks pretty good to me. And as we see, 56 days. I'm happy with this. I'm going to unplug, I'm going to put this back to safety, and then I'm going to proceed with the rest of the frame. While I was off camera, I took the liberty of drawing an outline of the pumpkin shape I want for this frame onto this sheet of plywood. Now I'm just going to cut this down to size so that it's a little bit more manageable, and then I'll actually cut out the shape using the jigsaw. Now that this is down to a manageable size, we just need to trace the outline and cut this out. If you have a scroll saw, that would probably be the best way. Most likely, for myself and for most people, we're going to be using the jigsaw. I'm not going to show you the entire process, but you'll get a sense of how it goes as I start, and then I'll show you the finished product. Okay, that's enough to give you a sense of how this carving works. I'll come back when I get to cutting out the middle piece. And now to cut out this window on the inside, we will also use the jigsaw, but in order to get the blade in there, we'll drill holes just to give it an access point. Now, as you can see with these holes, we can fit the jigsaw blade right in, and we'll be able to cut out the inside. Now that first cut probably isn't perfect, but I'll get the clock and see how it fits and trim up the edges either with the jigsaw or with some rasps or sandpaper to get a perfect fit. And there we go. I've cleaned up the edges a little bit so it slides in easily. Of course it will be mounted in, so this slightly loose fit is appropriate. It doesn't need to be 100% perfectly tight. So I think this is about as perfect as I can make it. And now, while I still have this clamped down, I think I'm going to do a little bit of sanding on the inside just to get that out of the way. I'll do more sanding later on when it's closer to finished. Now the next thing I need to do is figure out exactly how I want to mount these support braces on. What I'm planning on doing is running wood along the top and the bottom, skipping over where the control board is hanging over the edge. That should be pretty easy to do. I just need to figure out exactly how much overhang I want. And I think I want to go a couple inches to either side. So I think I want one of the boards to go maybe to about there, and then to about there, and then the same thing on the bottom. And that turns out to be just about 14 inches long. I have a 1x2. I'm going to cut just two 14-inch lengths off of that, and then I will use those as the support braces. Now I could do this on my miter saw, but rather than setting that up, since I've got the table saw here anyway, that's what I'm going to use. But because this is such a long board, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to cut each of these a little bit too long, and then I'll come back and mark the exact lengths and cut them precisely. Now that I have two more manageable lengths, I can measure out the 14 inches that I want. And make a mark. Do the same thing on the other one. And make a mark. Then I can just use my square and turn that mark into a line. And bear in mind, I only need approximately 14 inches. This is not a precision operation. This is going to be on the back side, and it's extending far enough over the edges in both directions that none of this needs to be exact. I just want it as close as possible. Now I can go ahead and take care of both of these, just cutting to the line. And there they are, two 14-inch lengths of wood ready to brace the clock on the back of the frame. And now we can check and make sure that everything's going to fit together the way that I expect it will. That will rest in there with these boards on either side. The one thing that I notice is there are these little plastic nubs on the back of this clock. Those are just going to need to come off so that everything will fit flush. Now I think the next thing that I want to do before I actually attach those support braces is to give this a quick light sanding while everything is still flat and relatively easy to do. So I'm going to do that now. And that looks pretty good. To get around the edges, I'm going to use a combination of just sandpaper and this sanding stick, which is actually just a paint stir stick with sandpaper spray adhesive to it. That's an idea I picked up from Steve Ramsey over at the Woodworking for Mere Mortals channel. Check his stuff out if you like the woodworking stuff. And while I'm just sanding, this is a good time also to say that even if you don't want to make the Halloween countdown clock, you can easily make these pumpkin shapes and use them as photo frames or even just pumpkins without the cutout. Use them for whatever you want. So this is a fairly versatile project. And that feels pretty good. The last thing I want to do is, again with the sanding stick, I'm just going to go over very lightly all of the edges just to round them off a little bit so there aren't such sharp corners. And now that's sanded. And as long as I'm in the sanding mood, I suppose I ought to go ahead and sand these support boards as well. And that's sanding done with both the boards and the frame. Now it's just time to put everything together. And now the most challenging part of this project is getting the screw holes through these boards in the right place so that everything lines up properly. In order to do that, I've put the clock back in position and I'm going to line everything up. I've drawn a line on this so that this will be square. And if I mark where I want these to line up, then I'll be able to line them up properly. I'll draw a line there, and I'll do the same thing for this one. That's so I know how far widthwise the screws need to be. Alright, that should do for that. Now the other challenge is knowing where lengthwise to drill the screws so that they'll line up with the screw holes in the back of the clock. And the trick that I've come up with for that is to use this cabinet hardware jig. These sliders move up and down the length of this ruler, and if I screw through these holes and then lock these into place, everything will be exactly where I need it to be, and I can just transfer the jig over to the board. Alright, screws are in place. Make sure all of these are tight so that nothing slips. And then unscrew the screws. And now, this is exactly the right distance. I'm also making marks along where the screws go this way so that I know I can line everything up properly. We'll turn these marks into lines straight across. And now all I need to do is take the cabinet hardware jig and line it up so that each hole corresponds with the cross on those lines. That's also a good way of double checking to make sure that the cross on the lines that I made and the holes on the jig line up, and if they match, that means everything's in the right place. I'm going to use this punch to mark those spots. And now we have clear marks. I'm not sure how well that shows up on camera, but we have clear marks punched into the wood that shows exactly where I need to drill through. And we'll do the same thing with this other board, and we'll punch these in place as well. And now that board's ready to go also. Now I need to choose which of my drill bits will fit one of these screws. Okay, I've selected an appropriate drill bit that's just about the same size as the shaft of these screws, but smaller than the heads, which is what I need. So now I just need to drill through and hope to God I've got everything lined up properly. Those fit through perfectly. That's exactly what I want. Now I just need to test and see. Hopefully these will line up properly with the clock. And we'll do the same thing with the other board. And there we go. All of them fit. Everything lines up properly, just as I want it to be. Now I don't want to glue these boards down while the electronics are still inside, so I'm going to draw a line all the way around to make sure that I know exactly how it's all going to line up in the end. Now I can take this all out, and I can use these lines to know exactly where to put my wood glue. And now it's time for our glue up. I'm going to apply it to the frame itself, and then I'll put the boards in position. And I've got some clamps at the ready. Key is to make sure that this lines up perfectly. Wipe away the excess glue so I can see my mark. And same thing on this one. That should do. We'll leave that to dry for half an hour or so. Now, even though it's gone dark, I've moved under a light in the garage. Pretty much everything is done. I've tested the fit. All we need to do now is to paint this. I've chosen an orange paint for the bulk of this, and once that's dry I'll be able to touch up some other colors later. front done. We'll let that dry for a little while, and then I'll be able to flip it over and get the back. And also, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you the rest of the painting process, but it's going to be exactly the same. I'm going to apply the orange paint to the front and back, possibly a couple of coats, and then, depending on how I feel about it, I'll come back and add some more color to detail it later. And here it is, finally finished and ready to go. Let me just walk you through what I did while I was off camera. First thing I did off camera was to put a few more coats of this orange paint on both the front and back. And then I reinstalled the electronics using the screws on the back. I also installed this hook so you can hang it from a nail. I may or may not actually use that. It may just rest up against something, maybe on a shelf, or I might hang it on the wall. I haven't decided yet. And finally, I used some acrylic paints to paint the stem because I didn't want it to just be orange like the rest of it. I didn't show you that because, frankly, I'm not a great painter. There are better tutorials. But I used some greens and some browns and some brownish greens and some greenish browns and then some brownish yellows to sort of speckle the whole thing until it looked stem-like. But it's now all ready to go. I have the cord plugged into it and to a power outlet here, so all I need to do is turn it on and hope everything works. So, fingers crossed, here we go. It does take it a couple minutes to start up and to contact the Wi-Fi and download the time and date information. It begins by showing our pumpkin. It does that while it's collecting the time and date information, and then once it's ready to go, it will start to display the time, the countdown. And there we go. Number of days remaining, and then our ghost, and then hours, and then it switches to bats, and it cycles through between time, here we go, minutes. It cycles through between time and these images. There's our skull, and finally our until Halloween. And then it's going to restart with the pumpkin, and it's just going to keep cycling through, counting down every time. This will count down until Halloween of this year, 2021. You need to go back into the code and reprogram it for each year, but that is just a matter of changing the year. In order to set it for this year, I just had to change the code from 2020 to 2021. After Halloween this year, all I'm going to have to do is plug this back into my computer and change the code again from 2021 until 2022, and it's just going to keep counting down. This should work as long as the electronics still function. So I'm pleased with this little project, and I hope some of you might like to build it yourself. And now, as you can see, we only have 45 days until Halloween, so I've got a lot to do, so I'm going to go get back to work. So until next time, take care and stay scared.